All right. We are back. We're back. I believe we are back. Good day. It's Monday, July 15th. Man, it just feels like time has flown. We're the middle of the month of the middle of the year. It's an interesting place to be. The whirlwind of the last legislative session is behind us. July 1st came and enacted a bunch of what was some of those changes, and we reviewed that earlier in the month. We've officially crested a year with the podcast, and still people don't know that we exist, which is fine. We're just trying to help spread information that's accurate. We are the Home Education Foundation. We do lobby for home education freedoms. We say that, but it's really truly parent education freedoms for the parent to direct the education as they see fit without interference from outside organizations or institutions. We love for parents to be free to make the choices that they want to make and be empowered to do so and be protected by law as well. And that's what we push for. And you've joined our podcast. You can't see us yet because we have to do our normal thing where we thank our sponsors. So we're going to give a special thanks to our top sponsors. We have a few of them, which is it's a great thing to say. I think for the whole first year almost, I was saying, in 1 week and another week, give me another month. It's right around the corner, I promise. But now they're here. We have our title sponsor, Arete, which is a cybersecurity firm. And then we have FPEA, who's been with us for the last year. Thank you for being by our side. And then we have Fisher Precious Metals, who's come along with us as well. These are some of our larger sponsors, and we give a special shout out and thanks. And I think I owe it to Katie Lane to announce that she has come on as not a top sponsor, but a sponsor nonetheless. She has become a donor by going to flhef.org and signing up to support. And you know, it's wonderful to see the support, the communicative support from our audience, the families that are home educating alongside of each other, and to see them in the chat week after week. But it's another thing whenever they're finally hit that milestone where they go, okay, cool, we've made it a budget plan and we've put it aside, and here we are supporting you. And I saw her name pop up. I just wanted to shout her out because she's been with us for quite a while, in and out of the comments. And I ran into her over in Jacksonville. It was great to see her face to face, and now like she's checked all the boxes, and we wish all the families in Florida would do that, and it would mean that we could do so much more. But anyway, a special thank you to all of the families that sponsor us, as well as our title and top sponsors. All right, without any more, let's get into it. Good day, Brenda. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm good. I feel like my camera's off, but I'm good. Let's see. If I move it this way, then I don't have to move where I sit. Okay, great.
I think we're going to be heading south at the end of this week.
We are, in fact, heading south at the end of this week. We're going to the Tampa Bay Homeschool Conference, or lovingly shorthanded TBHC. It is huge, actually. It's a huge conference that just started in last year, I believe, was the first.
I think it was last year.
I think it was the first.
Yeah, last year was the first.
And Kim Hannon has done an amazing job with that conference. Yeah. Oh wait, I think I still have you. Do I have you silenced? No, you're good. Sometimes I forget to unsilence you all, and I just wanted to make sure. Oh, Brenda's Crystal and Crystal's Brenda. Let me see if I can fix that.
No, it looks right on mine.
Oh, it looks right on yours, but it doesn't look right on mine. She's right.
Yeah,
The nameplates were mixed up. Let's try that. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you. Really appreciate you coming in clutch with that. And if I make any other mistakes, you guys just feel free to point them out. I'm human. I'm only human after all. So,
juggling lots of balls. So,
and not at all. Yes, the end of the week we will be down in Tampa for the TBHC. And Kim has told me to remind everybody that while the online ticket sales are closed, and I think that it should kind of be obvious, but it's one of those things that if you haven't really built a website or worked in any of this, you maybe don't know the kind of flow of how things come in late, and then, oh, but I ordered this online, but it hasn't shown up here yet, and so it can cause a lot of confusion. I get why they closed down online stuff early, and then the rest of them can be purchased later. As a website developer, it makes perfect sense to me, but it is what it is. So the ticket sales are available on site the day of, and that'll be this coming Saturday. So if you're there, we look forward to seeing you. And there's going to be all kinds of information for veteran homeschoolers, new to homeschool, or maybe kicking the tires of homeschooling. There'll be a lot of really good information. And then there's some really cool ideas that she had for teens, so young people who are looking at their homeschooling and they're kind of taking their initiative to do their own thing. Debbie, can't wait to see you either. Yeah, that's awesome. And there's also an interesting thing she dropped on the stream last week about there's a dad's thing that's there. So there is something specifically for dads, which I thought I didn't know about when she was on the podcast. I was really hoping she would have elaborated on that. So I'm gonna be curious to find out. Although being the MC, I might not be able to get into that. So we'll see what we have time for. Aside from that, Brenda, we had a very interesting call this past week. We got to watch, we got to watch things move very quickly and very slowly. You often say, what is it that you say? The gears of government are greased with epoxy. Is that what it is?
Oiled with epoxy.
Oiled with epoxy. Yeah.
The wheels of government are oiled with epoxy.
Yeah, and that has definitely been the case on some of the issues that we've been asking for attention on, but it was great to finally see that come through. And I don't know that everybody who's listening knows what some of those key things were from the beginning that you've been talking about. I'll kick it off by saying that originally last year when PEP was being implemented, Brenda brought to the attention that implementation and the logistics of implementation is going to get in the way of the idea of the program and the statutes, the way that they're written. So there was going to be a conflict between the way statutes had set it up, how quickly it was put in motion, and the kind of lack of guidelines for implementing it that needed to be rolled out. And I got to witness what the lack of guidelines looks like on a phone call with all 60 plus districts, 67, right? Districts.
Right.
Man, yeah, that
Chaos.
it was pure chaos. So many people going, well, we weren't told we had to do that, and this isn't there. And it was the need for those guidelines and the things to be very spelled out was apparent to me on that call, and very frustrating. I had to stay on mute, I think, for quite a while. But yeah, Brenda, elaborate on some of those key things as far as implementation goes, what some of those hiccups were.
Well, let's go back to 2 legislative sessions ago when they were discussing the PEP program. Mm-hmm. First of all, as you know, I lobbied very heavily and was successful in getting it separated from home education so that we could maintain the laws for home education separate and apart from the laws that provide funding to parents who want to teach their children at home.
Yes.
We wanted a fallback position. We didn't want anything that we had built for 40 years to be tampered with and over-regulated. And as we see things work down the line, when there's fraud, there's more regulation. Right. And so we were successful in that. But then when they created this and they kept saying they want to do this for home educators, they want to do this for home educators. Well, in the statute, when they put it in there, they only put it in there as numerical references so that it said that in the definition for the personalized education program, it said they shall have the same flexibility and opportunities as those or students in statute 100.2.41 3 through 12. Well, those are all the rights and opportunities that I had created over the last 40 years where it was bright. They got to participate in Bright Futures, extracurricular activities.
Good.
All of those reference other statutes.
Right.
So what they should have done in creating that, but they were so determined to push it through and get it passed, they didn't want to gunk up, so to speak, the bill. So they basically just shut their eyes and hoped that it was going to work out.
Right.
Well,
And in theory, in theory, if you look at the way that it's written, where it says, "Oh, this is the definition of PEP," and it has the same rights and opportunities or flexibilities and opportunities listed here for home education. In theory, that's sufficient.
but
right?
not in implementation.
No. In practice, it's not, because you get so many people who are like, "Well, that's not my job. Where does it tell me that's my job? I don't have to do that." I know that it says that they get that, but that doesn't mean that I have to be the one to do it. So where does it say that them getting that is my job? And that's
And
where
that's the pushback from the districts. And so much of
Yes.
this is tied into the school districts for being able to carry it out in the process of getting, just take the last example, Bright Future scholarships. Bright Futures, the OSFA office decided they didn't want all those volunteer hours to be sent to them to go over.
And OSFA is the Office of Financial
Student Financial Assistance.
Right. Okay.
They handle all the scholarships and grants for the state.
Right. Okay, keep going.
So they didn't want to deal with it. So they wanted to push it back on the school districts. There was nothing in statute that said the school districts had to do it.
Right. It didn't spell who did it.
So the question is, who has the authority to tell the school districts they have to do it? And we had been pushing and pushing and pushing the department to do something about it. And when, the saying that the wheels of government are oiled with epoxy, it's a very cumbersome process to get any kind of guidance out from the department. And they generally call those technical assistance papers.
Yeah.
So,
generally, that's not said anywhere. You told me that, and I was like, where is it called that? So you've got this combination of the way things run and the way things are called in general, but then also it's spelled out in other places, but not called that. I'm just like, what?
Well, this is just a practice that's occurred over the years, because what happens is when the legislature doesn't spell out the implementation part of this, then it goes to the department that would oversee that section of law. So for us, almost all of this will go through the Department of Education. Well, as we know, there's turnover in every single department and every single thing. So somebody might start it and then it falls through the cracks. But even if it's very smooth and you have the same people in place, it has to go through the lowest office over there, which is the Office of Independent Education and Parental Choice. So they start the process, then they have to take it to the commissioner, which is the chancellor. The chancellor is over the division at the department that handles it. Well, the division that we fall in is public schools, K through 12. Even though we're not public schools, that is where they've placed the Office of Independent Education, Home Education, and Virtual Education. Okay. Right. So it has to go through those channels where, the legislature passes an awful lot of bills relating to public schools every year. So they had the DREG legislation that went through last year. Yes. So that's a higher priority than our little numbers in that definition for personalized education.
Yeah, they've got things that are urgent that they're having to solve.
And so when we raise our hand and say, oh, how about Bright Futures and those students that are trying to get it? Well, they then kick the ball over to OSFA.
Right.
And then OSFA says, well, we don't want those. Well, how are we going to make this work? Do we have the authority to make the school districts do this? And then they go back to the department, and then the department gets the legal teams involved. And of course, there are priorities over there. And so when they finally get around to taking our issue, then the legal department gets involved, and they make sure that every jot and tittle is exactly right before they send it out to the school districts.
It reminds me of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they're trying to decide to chase this person getting away, and they're like, "Well, did you submit the approval for the chase?"
In
Like, I think I
triplicate.
submitted
In triplicate.
in triplicate. Did you submit it in triplicate? He's like, "I think so." He's like, "Wow, you better submit a form for review of the the submittal for triplicate." It's like, and by then they've gotten away, But it was like, and then we have to have a hearing on whether oh man,
Exactly.
like a memo would fix it. Just send it out. Just send it out. A memo would fix it. But all of these things, then that has to go to this person's desk, and then it has to get through their list of priorities, and then it has to, any wording changes, or, well, what about this? And they have to discuss that, and then get back, and it's like a simple memo that says, yes, this is your job. Take care of those hours. Would fix it. Which ultimately is where we ended up.
That's what they ended up doing, was sending out that memo after our conversations last week. Not that it wasn't ready to go. We just didn't know that it was ready to go, but we had.
And we've been on this.
We had 2 calls, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday, that allowed the school district home education contacts to get on, ask questions, and gripe. They're overworked, underpaid. It's not our job. Some of the districts are doing a great job, but
some of them are doing phenomenal.
I honestly agree with them. They are overworked and underpaid because our numbers have grown and grown. And in some districts, the larger districts, it's like a small school that they've got to oversee.
Yeah, and some of them had almost 10,000 to run. 6,000 to 10,000. I think one of them said they had almost 9,000 or 10,000, and one of them said they had like 6,000 that they had to run. And I'm like, well, it adds up, but
well, I mean, they have to keep up with the anniversary date. They have to input all of the volunteer hours and approve that the child has been in home education for 11th and 12th grade. So that means going and checking their records, whether it's online or whether it's in paper. And they are responsible for verification. That's just one thing. Then they have to verify for dual enrollment, and they have to verify for extracurricular activities with the FHSAA. They do have a lot of work, and I empathize with them. The problem is if we push for them to get maybe 1 point, let's see, how do we do this? A 0.1 of an FTE, and that's a full-time equivalent. That's what FTE stands for, which is the $7,500 that the district gets for every student. So if we push for 1/10 of an FTE to give the district more money, that doesn't necessarily mean that goes to the home ed office. It doesn't necessarily mean that the home ed contact gets more money or more people in their office. It just means the district gets more money. So, I agree with them, but the way the money flows, I'm not sure they really would get any more. And then they have more authority and more people sometimes harass homeschoolers. For the most part, they don't, but in some cases.
Some of them on that call. I mean,
I've met in person with some of them on the call twice.
I really felt, to a degree there, we were like making enemies. I was like, what is going on? I thought we could work together. Like, what is happening here?
Well, there are a few that are just mainly wanting to make sure that they don't have to do more work than they think they should, and that they want home education to be as cut and dried as the public school. And so some of them are not really engaged fully in supporting home educated
some of them, though, were on top of it. I don't know who the gentleman was. I don't remember his name, and I probably couldn't mention it here anyway. But he came in strong. He was like, no, this is your job. you have to do this. We have to do this.
And
We
you need to
cannot
figure
deny
out a
these
way.
PEP students, and it's up to you to figure out how, but you do have to do it. And I was like, wow, who is this guy? I want to buy, what's his name? What's his number? Let's get him. Let's get him. He was great. And there was
Well,
one of the, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I fully understand where they're coming from because they
Yeah.
are, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but they're low level employees. And just like in the
Right.
department, they've got big issues in the district, and home education is just this tiny little thing. Well, as you know, Jason, because you know all about computer systems and databases and stuff, the districts have to categorize everything with a number that relates to home education. So they finally figured that out. Believe me, it took them maybe 5 years on these same calls that I've been doing for maybe, goodness, going back 20 years for them to come up with a code that represents home education students. So now we have a code statewide. The department needed to create a code for PEP students because the people at the low level who don't have anything to do with their database management, they don't have a way to input those volunteer hours. So I understand their complaints, and I understand you're asking us to do something that's impossible. There's no way in our database system. We can't enter them as home education students because they're not. What do we do with these students, and how do
Right.
we do this? And so
Yeah.
there really needs to be a uniform code given to all the districts for PEP students. It would make it so much simpler. But I mean, you got to get the database people at DOE involved in this. And then I don't know what's involved in that whole office and why they can't do that on a simple basis. But that's part of the problem that the districts have. And so it looks like they're trying to be uncooperative, but
Right.
really they don't have the
It's not
power.
all uncooperation.
Right. They don't have the power to call up the database management
Right.
system and say, hey, we need a code for this. Now,
Right.
I know that one of the gals from Nassau County that was on there, she
That's what she
basically a
did.
small enough county that they probably see these people every day in the office.
Mm-hmm.
You take a district like Polk County or Hillsborough County, they may be in separate buildings in different places. They don't know the people to call and talk to. So I
Mm-hmm.
really understand their issues. And I guess my
Yeah.
frustration is with the Department of Education not being more proactive in making this happen. Whose fault is it? I don't know that it's anybody's fault.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just,
disappointing that we
yeah,
get.
it's just frustrating because parents don't know whether to
Mhm.
haven't up until this point
Yeah.
known for sure if they sign up for PEP that their child who is a senior is going to be able to get the bright futures. And so
Mm-hmm.
1 year of PEP does not uh, give you the same amount of money as if your child gets a 4-year bright future scholarship. So
Right.
it's frustrating for the parent. I foresaw all
Yeah.
of this 2 years ago because
Yeah.
I had worked to create the law that governs extracurricular activities. Home education was the first,
School choice.
yeah, right, school choice other than public and private, and all those laws were
Mm-hmm.
written for public and private school students. So we had to force the FHSAA literally
Mm-hmm.
back then in 1996 by putting them into statute to allow home educated students to have privileges to participate in both music and in sports or
Mm.
athletics. And it's a shame that we had to do that. And they were so obstinate about we're not going to serve homeschoolers. That was
Yeah.
what they told the
Yeah.
governor's office.
I mean that some of the sentiment that we heard on that call was there too. Like that. There's a. Sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No,
Finish.
that's okay. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say there's definitely still. I know that by and large, over the last 40 years, the disposition toward home education has changed. It's more normalized. Now when you ask people, hey, well, where do your kids go to school? And you're like, oh, we homeschool. They're like, oh, good for you, right? There's a general disposition that's changed, but not in a lot of like key positions, right? And I don't know if it's because of the people drawn to those positions and what they're thinking. I don't know. I don't know enough about them personally to know, but there's definitely this is protect public school mindset. And these homeschoolers are just gumming it up and ruining everything. Like, this is taking so much of my time. We don't even have this. There's not even a budget for this, And I'm scratching my head like, well, you get a paycheck and you cash it and the funds were good. So seems like the funding was there if you're told that this is in your purview to do it. Like,
It's part of your job description that
missing
you're
where
getting
there's
paid.
no funding. Yeah. So like we can it doesn't come sometimes down to about the matter of the rules, is a matter of an attitude and a disposition toward home educators. And it's not 100%. Like not every district is out to get their home educators or anything like that. So please don't hear or misunderstand what I'm trying to say. There were definitely some people who were energetic about solving problems and not just talking about problems that exist. And they were a breath of fresh air on that call, and it was great to hear them speak up and not be silent on the call, because I'm thinking that there's a lot of people on that call who didn't talk, right? So, and some of them may not agree with everything that was said on the call, but they just may not have a dog in the fight or care. They want to get off the call and get back to work, and so they just didn't speak. And the call can leave you feeling one way or the other. Like there's so many people who hate home education or just don't want to have to deal with it, and maybe they just don't like doing their job. But there were also a number of them who were very, very energetic about solving problems and serving children, and that's how they saw it. They were doing their job as a matter of serving the parents and serving that up to the children, and they were not going to leave any kid behind. And that I really appreciate that sentiment.
I was just going to say, in general, people are the most vocal when they have something to complain about. We see that on Facebook all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that surprising that the most vocal ones on the call would have been those that are frustrated with some part of the system. But like you said, that's not to say that represents every district's home education office. But.
Right.
No, we've had, and I've driven down to some of the districts in South Florida to meet with them face to face. She's retired now, but one of the districts down in that area in Boca, Palm Beach County, she was great. We worked together on writing certain documents and figuring out processes for the Florida High School Athletic Association. And she saw her role as the principal of the homeschoolers. We had to kind of back her off of that a little bit, because at first it was more, we want to tell them how to do it. But once she kind of got what her role was, she was terrific. And then I've had head-to-heads with the person that was in Broward County. But after we finally explained to them and got them to believe what their role was, that they weren't the principal of a public school just because it was called homeschool to them. We didn't call it homeschool in statute. That it's the parents' responsibility, not theirs, to see that the child meets all of the benchmarks for 4th grade, 5th grade. That's not their role.
Right.
And once you do some education with them and show them the laws, and they go, okay, and then they're very cooperative and helpful. And we've done that with a number of districts. But, for the most part, over the years, we've had, I would say 98% of the districts just bend over backwards to help homeschoolers. And many of them have become friends. I'll stop by and see them when I'm in the district because they have become very friendly. So I love our district home education contacts. I know they've got, it's a difficult job because they've got to deal one-on-one with parents. Yeah. Some of our parents are good, and some of our parents don't have a clue what the laws say. And that was one of their big complaints, is that that parents come in and say, I'm home educated, I need you to document bright futures, when in fact, the parent may have been in a private school
Right. As an
umbrella
umbrella.
school,
Yes.
and they don't know what the law is. So
we did talk with them about that. I know that we've mentioned that on our stream before and on our podcast. And I think that it would be really good in the near future, maybe very near future, if we could do maybe the first 30 minutes of one of these as a deep dive into the options, and then go on. And I'll have to work up. We started working on the slides for that, so we'll have to finish those because I think it's going to be a very valuable asset. But that was one of the key issues.
They even asked for us to come up with. They asked us to come up with a document explaining the different options.
Right.
So we need to work on that. And then one of the other complaints that they have, which I completely understand where they're coming from, we have, contrary to popular opinion, irresponsible parents in the state of Florida.
Dun, dun,
I know, it's shocking. Those are the parents that can't manage to get their child to a public school every day, and therefore the child becomes truant. I was just, I was connected to a person whose children had gotten a scholarship to attend a different public school. And if the child's hair didn't look good that day and the child pitched a fit and didn't want to go to school, the parents said, okay, you don't have to go to school. Well, it got pretty close to being a truant situation. Wow. I think it's 5 days in a 10-day period or 10 days in a 90-day period, I think is the truancy catch. And if you're going to let a child stay home just because you don't want to force them to have a fight with them about going to school over their hair, or they don't like breakfast, or whatever it happens to be,
certainly,
that's serious. And parents don't understand. They literally don't understand they can be prosecuted for not sending their children to school. So this is one of the big issues that we face. It's not in the home education law, thankfully, because I fought the district attorneys who were pushing for a way to stop parents from saying, oh, I don't want to send my child to school. I stayed up all night. I'm a prostitute. I'm an alcoholic. They wouldn't admit that, but that's the situation. This was stuff that was coming from a judge in the Panhandle. And he was seeing this over and over and over in his courtroom, where kids are being prosecuted for non-attendance or ultimately truancy. Kids weren't being prosecuted, parents were being prosecuted. And then the parent would say, well, I'm just going to homeschool my child. Well, then they drop out of the system. We don't have a truant officer in home education. We made it broad enough that you have a whole year to be able to establish educational progress commensurate with the child. So we don't have to meet any kind of benchmarks for grade levels or even declare grade levels. So it's a black hole as far as attendance is concerned, because nobody's overseeing if you have irresponsible parents. So he contacted the State Attorneys Association and said, I want this stopped. He home educated his children, and he didn't want home education to be the dumping ground for truants. And oh, by the way, the districts, not the home education contacts, but the truancies, truant officers were recommending to these parents of truants, hey, you can just sign them up in home education and you won't be harassed by my office. So they were recommending it happening. And because they didn't want to deal with the truants, but that's not our responsibility. In the statute in 1003.26, right in the beginning, it says that the state of Florida basically holds the superintendent responsible to see that every child in the district attends school regularly. That's the school district's responsibility. So even though the home education contacts are very upset about this law. It's a superintendent's responsibility. So a few years ago, when that law was being discussed, I worked very closely with the State Attorney Association's representative, and they wanted to say parents couldn't home educate. Well, HSLDA said, well, that violates their rights to home educate, and we can't just say they can't go into home education. So we had to figure out a way that if parents really were having a problem with their child, saying the child was being bullied, they didn't have bullying statutes that give them scholarships back then. They're being bullied, or maybe they're behind in where they should be if they're a fourth grader and they're not getting the information. The child's frustrated, crying every day going to school, and the parent really wants to do something to help that child. Well, then home education may be a good choice for them. But you have to have some accountability, because if you open it up and say, okay, they can just home educate and not have any limitations on it, then you're going to get the irresponsible parents dumping their kids into home education. That's going to reflect poorly on those home educators who are doing a good job.
Well, so that's an interesting point that you raised, because that was kind of how I got into home education myself when I was growing up, is my grades started to drop. I started to be a poor performer. I was a straight A student before that. I think school was just easy. And then whenever I got to that sixth grade level, sixth and seventh and eighth, like it just each year incrementally more A's and B's, B's and C's, and then started to get D's, and it just saw that drop off and decline. And my mom was like, something's not working. So how do we fix this? And there just wasn't much. There wasn't much insight, I think, offered by the school teachers as well. And, you know, that was the same time that I, saw that girl visit a church, and I was like, Mom, what's homeschooling? Let's try that. And it just kind of like perfect storm came together, and I convinced her that's what we needed to do. But it ended up being a better option, because I then flourished outside of that environment, But I guess that it's not the same for every kid, but there are, what you're saying, there are ways where it's easy for people to fall through the cracks. I think I remember some of the people on the call even saying that law was outdated. They're like, oh, that law is outdated.
How?
Which I thought was interesting. Yeah, I'm like, how does a law become outdated? I mean, I guess some of them can be, but
well, I mean, it could be updated to say that any child that has a history of truancy could be given the information that they could get an FES, Family Empowerment Scholarship, for educational opportunities. In other words, to attend a private school. So the districts could offer them a variety of options if all of the things listed above F in that statute, where it says that the school district has to basically form a committee to make sure that they have clothes to go to school, that they have transportation, that maybe they would do better in a different school or have a different teacher, or there's a lot of things in that above F, which is the home education part of that law, that some of those kids may not have enough food or clothes. And one of the home ed people in the district ended up also having truancy in her office. And she was trying to apply the same thing to homeschoolers. And we had to have a few intense conversations with her. Yes. But her heart was right, because she saw many of these kids that were not attending school living in poverty, and they weren't having, they didn't have clothes, and, so she would take clothes to them. But that's kind of how all of this came about. So anyway, what we came up with was kind of a balance, and the balance was that the parents could enroll in a home education program registered with the superintendent, but they had to bring in at the end of 30 days evidence that they were providing an education to the child. And in order to make sure that they didn't keep it on the public school level, but actually allowed them to exercise the freedoms in the home education law, we put 2 home educated parents with at least 3 years of experience to be on the committee, along with 1 district home education liaison, or the person that handles it. So it was a 2-to-1, because we knew what would happen is the people that were in that position, who had come through the public school, gone to public college, been indoctrinated at the level of a teacher, and then they come back to the district, they're paid by the district, and all they know literally about education is public school. So they think that's the only way that you can provide an education.
Homeschool's public school at home. Yeah.
So we were trying to balance that to make sure that the truant parent of a truant, had the freedom to actually home educate the child. All they had to bring in was a reading list or samples of the child's work. Or if they were doing Florida Virtual, some of them actually signed the child up into Florida Virtual. Print out some samples of the child's work. That's all we were asking. And so what we found when they were actually working, before there were so many home educating families in Florida, and remember, this only applies to truants. So only truants have to go through this committee.
Correct.
So what we were finding is, at the end of 30 days, probably half of the parents put their kids back in some other form of education because they really didn't want to home educate. And by the time they were brought in for the second review at 60 days, there were only a handful statewide of parents that stayed in home education. So it limited the number of truants going into home education. If it worked correctly and continued, they would have expanded the people in that office and brought in somebody else that could sit on that committee with the parents. Well, then over time, the home education community didn't see their responsibility for protecting the law from further regulation, decided they didn't have time to sit on those review committees. And so the districts were having a terrible time trying to find parents that would give up 1 day a week, a month, to go sit on the review committees. And so I don't know how to fix that problem. I mean, that's what we're hoping.
I think awareness is one thing.
Yeah.
I think a lot
maybe
of parents,
having the context for why it matters, like what you've just explained. Yeah.
The need for accountability is clear. Right? The need for so that home education doesn't become the dumping ground.
Exactly.
The black hole. The need for accountability is clear. So like at the bottom of the barrel, there's a very real need for accountability. The question then is, who does it lie with? The statutes right now, as you stated, set it up so that that responsibility lies with the superintendent. And then there's a review board that is in place with some gentle, in my opinion, very gentle litmus tests for whether or not you're offering a home education program to your child. And that is a weed out measure. Just having the accountability in place is a weed out measure for parents who are just bouncing from one thing to the other, not interested in doing any of them, just to dump their kids somewhere and not be bothered. Because then it weeds them out, and then they have to put them back somewhere because they don't want to do the minimum. And that I think that the minimum, and that it being a minimum, is gentle and fair. But you're right. If they cannot get the number of people to make that committee, they will still need an accountability measure. and that the burden becomes onerous at that point on the district employees because they can't fulfill that need. So there's a very real need for them to have the cooperation of home education parents across the state so that that measure can stay in place. And maybe that's what they mean by it's outdated, is that we're having so much trouble fulfilling it because we can't get enough people on the seats. And of course, I don't know that that's the exact reason why everywhere, but we did suggest putting a committee together, which they agreed. Several of them agreed to join so that we could find out where some of those issues are. And I was glad to see their cooperation and interest in that. But I don't know that the law necessarily is outdated. I don't know that there's very many parents who know. I didn't know a couple of years ago, before you and I started really diving into this and to that and different little things, I didn't know. And it's not like you have a very real need to Google that information to find, you know, and it's like, well, what should I be doing as a homeschool parent? Oh, you should be sitting on the home education committee review board. Everyone should be followed. Like, there's nowhere that information is robust and delivered and saying like, this is a great idea and an ample opportunity for you. You should also be walking in, campaigns with your representatives to make sure that you're like, there's nowhere that was. And that was one of my big things that coming on with the Home Education Foundation. I wanted to make it easier for people to find that kind of information and know how they can activate and be a part. We get people all the time who ask, what can I do to help and how can I be a part? And honestly, the answer, there's so many. I don't know where to start. I don't know which ones you're doing or not doing, and there's so many. And it is a complex system, and Brenda has done a great. I can't say we yet, but Brenda has done a great job of trying to make sure that things that have happened have not been onerous. They have been minimal, and the accountability is needed. So she's worked and negotiated back and forth by hitting those benchmarks, but then also protecting the rights and freedoms. And I think having the board, the review committee, be 2-to-1 weighted is brilliant. But we can't find people to sit on the committees, right? So that I think, get involved. If I had one message to parents who are listening, if there are new home education families that you're a part of talking to or helping out, help them understand some of this stuff. Share our information with them, but kind of help them understand a lot of this stuff. Even if they're PEP families, and I know how everyone says, they're not really home education and blah, all this, they get treated that way. They get treated as it's a home education scholarship, and while it's a separate attendance path, they still get treated in a lot of the same ways anywhere that they show up, and in a lot of ways in statute. Though there may be things like DoE memos that lack implementation procedures. But by and large, if you see them coming on and they're new, help them kind of understand the landscape, the things that they can participate in, walking with representatives, sending in matters that at every level that we interact with people in the districts, in the DoE, in the governor's office, in the legislative body. Public school at home is what they think homeschooling is. And things that don't work like that system don't make sense to them. Well, this is just how education works. I don't know what you mean. Like, what is it you're doing? What are you even trying to spend your money on with the scholarships? Or what does that mean? And, well, we need a better system for this, or we need a better idea of what they're doing so that we know that blah. And it's like, hang on a second, you don't. I think one of the district representatives, not representatives, but what do you call them? Contacts, was talking about their letter of intent form. And I love I'm talking too fast to say her name correctly. Marie Claire Moreau, thank you. With the Florida Homeschool Association. She spoke up so gently when the lady was like, we need you guys to push home education families to do a better letter of intent. We need more information from them. We constantly are having to ask them for this and ask them for that and get this information. And just help us help them by getting that information. And Marie Claire gently spoke up, but very firm, a lot like you. And she just said, well, what you need to know is that we advocate that they don't do that. That they give the minimum information that's required to satisfy the letter of intent in statute. And that's what they like. They can work with you on the rest and get the other. You can ask them for the other information in other ways, but we recommend the general letter of intent. And I don't think that the district contacts understand that. I don't think that a lot of home education families understand that when they're being asked for information, how it plays into a part of the job that the district contacts have, and or why the parents want to not have to give their information and there's so much that can be lost in miscommunication, and it can become a hairy mess. But I think that home education families getting involved, being involved, understanding this statute about truancy is huge. 1003. Well, is it truancy? It's actually about attendance. 1003.26. Particularly F, if you're interested in reading it, where it lays these out. Having people who are available for things like this matters a lot. It matters a lot. Anyway.
Well, and things kind of, if you don't keep pushing back on freedoms and you just allow it to go on, like it's not affecting me. So what do I care if they tell those truant parents they've got to do 4 courses in a year?
Yeah.
One of them mentioned that. We require them to do 4 core courses. Well, they can't require that because these parents are operating, the truant ones that are allowed to go into home education, they're operating under the home education law. So if there is the understanding at the district level that they can require 4 core courses, over time, when people aren't pushing back and educating, that's what's going to get expected at the district level for every home education family. Oh, right. Well, you, and one of them said this. Well, the teacher that reviews them said they made educational progress commensurate with their ability. How do I know they're being educated? It's not your job.
Right.
There are things that are your job, but trying to see that child is properly educated is not your job, because Florida is not, and I repeat over and over, an education state. You noticed in that particular statute, it didn't say that the superintendent's responsible to see that every child in the district is educated. It says attend school regularly. And yes, the superintendent is responsible for seeing that the laws passed by the legislature pertaining to public schools is implemented. But there again, every child that goes through a public school is not educated. They can claim they are, but some of them finish, they go walk on the stage and they don't get a diploma. They didn't complete what the requirements were.
Yeah.
Brenda, so
sometimes I wonder if I think the greatest argument that aliens don't exist is that, they would probably take one look at our planet and realize there's no signs of intelligent life and move on by. I'm quite certain sometimes, of that. So education, man, to what level? How do you, anyway, you've done an amazing job. And I'll echo what Jane Feddick says here. She says, Brenda's an amazing woman, and we were and are blessed to have her. And I echo that sentiment, because you've been very judicious and very insightful into potential problems that you headed off. I can't even tell you. I wish there was a way to count stuff like that. Like, there are problems that you've pushed back, and those are easy to see, but the potential problems averted, there's no way to put those on an abacus or count and measure them. And I do think that it makes it difficult to appreciate for all the people who aren't aware of it, because it's so hard to be aware of, even when you're in the weeds on it like we are, of how all the different problems that this one little thing circumvented down the road. And I'm just immensely appreciative of you. Jane also says, I was asked to be a liaison for accountability back then, and I wish I had understood the job better then. Now I have the ability to tell homeschool parents about this podcast, to receive information that is vital to them understanding the bigger picture. Jane, thank you. And I hope that everybody listening will do the same thing, because especially on this particular topic, this is one of those issues where it's not maybe an 80-20 rule or a 90-10 rule. 90% of the people who home educate, I would love to think that they're all doing it for great reasons. And they have wonderful plans and a vision for what they want their children to be when they grow up and all of that. But there are people who just want to get by in life and they don't really care. And their kids get in the way of that. And they really needed to dump them off on the public school as a form of daycare, but then that didn't work out so well. And now they've got to bounce around and they're being told, oh, well, you can put them in home education and then we won't bother you anymore. And then it's like, great, you'll get off my back too. Man, I can get the kids off my back or let them watch TV all day or whatever it is. And it's there is a small subset that exists, and that it's the small subsets that can ruin it for everyone else, because in order to try to stop that from happening, the rules that get created for that become onerous and restrictive for everybody else. And so what's there is minimal and it's useful, and it does need home education parent involvement to keep it up. We're being told that it's outdated. Nothing in that statute looks outdated. It doesn't look like anything in that statute has aged poorly. It just simply looks like they're not being able to get the job done with the parameters that exist, as minimal as they are. And I do think that part of that is our fault. I didn't know about it until we dove into it. And the more aware of it I am, the more interested I am in making sure that it stays there. But I would imagine that Jane and there's so many other parents feeling the same way and just didn't know. Like I said, it's not really Googleable that's like a core thing front and center, that if you're a Florida home education parent, you should care about this. You should, but it's not front and center. So hopefully sharing this information or making it available puts a dent in that, a big one.
Well, one of the things that a lot of it is perception. So among this group of people, I'm sure there's some connections. And one parent tells another parent who's in the truancy, oh no, I'm gonna sneeze. In the truancy track for the district, and they hear this, that, oh, you can dump into home education. Well, if we're doing our job by serving on those review committees, and those parents are being brought in every 30 days and required to show that they're doing something, then word will soon get out to other parents. You don't want to have to go through that review committee. That's really, somebody's asking you what you're doing and you're embarrassed you're not doing anything. Yeah. That kind of stops the flow.
Right.
But when we're not doing our job, then it is a dumping ground. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that parents need to do at the local level, as well as what we're doing. We can handle a lot of that by being on these calls with the school districts and making contacts with them. And when parents report that they're overstepping, asking for more information than they're supposed to, there are leaders in the state that are, calling them and saying, well, you can't ask for that. Here's the law, and this is all you can ask for, and backing them down. I don't think it's negative. I don't think they're trying to encroach on home education. I think it's a lack of education, and that's our job. We have to educate those people. That's what you and Crystal and I are doing at the legislature. We're educating those people that have been elected, maybe don't know a thing about home education, or maybe they are public school at home educators, and they think everybody's supposed to do it their way. But our job here is to educate the top level people and stand firm on what they can and can't do. And it needs to happen in the local area as well. When you see somebody, mostly it'll be a district home education contact that is trying to do a good job, but what she knows is public school. And why wouldn't you want to give all that information?
Right. Yeah. There's an inherent trust. Yeah. Well, why wouldn't you want to do that? it helps us give the government that information, and then we can do our jobs easier. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, this makes me think again why it's so important for parents to be involved with campaigns and building relationships with the representatives, and because the more home educating families, PEP families that they know, the less that they'll just accept that default position that homeschooling looks like public school at home, that this is this
Right.
one way. Um, and I mean, like with our Tell Your Story project, we'd love to have more families submitting videos to that so we can build that
Yes.
repertoire.
Huge.
But a combination of that and just making those connections in your local community as a parent so that you can help shift those perceptions of what homeschooling is, what it looks like, at the district
Yeah.
level and at, the House and Senate level as you kind of build
Mhm.
those relationships.
I've got
Well, this
a story I'd like to tell, but we're at the end of the time, so we'll save it till another time.
is it about truancy or?
It was just following up on what Crystal said about getting to know the representatives, and what an impression that you make. I'll tell it quickly because it really
Okay.
does fit here.
Yeah.
One of my board members previously was very active in campaigns in her district. And so she worked very hard for the Republican to get elected. Well, the Republican didn't get elected, the Democrat was elected. So as soon as the campaigns were over, she takes her two boys and they go meet the new representative. And she introduces herself as a home education parent. She's a leader of a group in the district, and that if the representative had any questions at all related to home education, here's my number, please give me a call. So her children were sitting there with her. They didn't say much. They were reading their books while they were sitting there. And the lady said to her, "How do you get them to read so much?" And she said, "Well, that's what we do in home education." And so, time passes. She gets to the Capitol. They're going through the committee meetings. And I was sitting in the office, the appropriations office, waiting for my turn to go in. And she comes in and she didn't know she could just walk in. So she sat down next to me, waiting to be asked to come in. And I said, "Hello, Representative, blah, blah," whatever her name was. And I said, "I represent home education families in the Capitol. I'm Brenda Dickinson." And she didn't say anything. And I said, "I think one of my board members came to visit you after the election and brought her two boys." She looked at me and she said, "Those boys were amazing. I couldn't believe it." So, I mean, that impression changed her whole view of home education. And sometimes that's all it takes. Now, how she voted on bills, I didn't track, but certainly it was an eye opener to her that these kids that were being homeschooled really like to read.
Absolutely. We even had, I mean, even during this last session, we had Bracy Davis, who we had a parent reach out to us and say, "Oh, I have a contact with her." And
Representative.
what did I say?
You just said her name. I
Oh,
wanted them to know she's a representative.
Representative Bracy Davis. I'm sorry. Yes. And whenever we were, yeah, there's my human error again. Whenever we were in committee listening to her speak, she equivocated a couple of times and said, "Now listen, I'm a pro public school advocate. I'm pro public school." And she said it over and over and over. But then she said, "But we can't do this to the home education families, to these PEP students. We can't do this." And so she came down in favor of pushing back the restrictions on the PEP program. And that all because of a relationship with a parent from our home,
and
from our homeschool community.
She asked some discussion starting questions. Also, again, because of the conversation she had with this PEP parent.
So it matters. It goes a long way. And then building those relationships in your districts. getting involved so you can be on these types of committees, knowing that they exist, knowing that these are things that are important. And then if I can plug it one more time, the Tell Your Story project is immense. It is. I wish we could get immediate traction on it because we're going to need the stories very, very, very soon. Very, very soon. There are some very real battles coming our way, and it is going to be even more important in this next year that the legislators know that homeschooling is not public school at home. And when parents spend their money or educate or spend their time or decide what they're doing, they're not doing it in ways that public schools do it. And they're doing that by choice, and it shouldn't shock anyone.
And we've had some intel saying that there are some legislators that still want to revisit the equipment language that we were able
right back. That's right.
to get taken out of the bill this past year, but we were told it's probably going to be coming back. So the more parents connect at the district level and educate their legislators, even if you're not taking a PEP scholarship.
That's correct. Yeah,
it's
because
really
absolutely, because they need to understand that the PEP scholarship is meant to look like home education. And what does home education look like for all of you? So then it needs to be normalized so that when parents are spending the money in those ways, it's not odd to them.
That perception of home education affects all of it, whether you're PEP or not. The perception impacts home education with the districts as well.
Yeah.
And also, just to add to that, if you live near Tallahassee or are willing to drive, because this past year we had some people who drove up to 5 hours across the state to be at committees. If you're willing, just shoot us a message through the website so we can kind of have your name on a list, because it also made a huge impact for them to see kids sitting there in the committee meetings.
Yes.
And again, they were like, your kids are so well behaved. Your kids are so well spoken. Your kids are so attentive. Like it was making an impression just for them to observe the children. Even if you don't want to speak, but you just want to come be present at committee sessions with your kids and watch what's happening. And you can always, they have these papers. Yeah. They have these papers you can fill out where you can say whether you're in favor of the bill or not. You don't necessarily have to get up and speak, but being there and letting them see your kids, even if you're not comfortable with speaking, that makes a big impact. So.
It does. It most certainly does. I think
finding those people for us is like a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, it can
because we don't know who's out there and who can drive or who's willing to come. So if you don't identify yourself, it makes our job very difficult.
Well, listen,
and just one last thing. If you have a well-spoken, very articulate child, that's amazing too. If you have a teen or an older kid who would be willing to come and speak at committee sessions, that's gold for them to see the children speaking on their own behalf. That would be amazing.
Even if they've recently graduated. Like if it's something that they look back on than this last year, and that was anyway, yes. We're very aware that you guys have a very busy schedule. We love you for being with us. We have to get moving on to our other things, but we love that you take the time to be with us and to kind of hear some of the important issues as we peel behind the curtain and or look under rocks at different things and dive into some of the weeds on them. I'm hopeful that we go big picture down into the weeds and then back enough that it's beneficial to you. If you found it useful, your call to actions are simple. Please share the podcast with anyone that you think it would be useful. Anyone in if you're in a part of a homeschool group and they haven't seen any of our podcasts, please go ahead and just start sharing it in there. Let them know that we're here. A lot of the districts asked that for the podcast information so that they could even give it as a resource to new home education families in their districts so that they could get up to speed and we could answer questions for them and things like that. So we're really just trying to put together as robust a repertoire of accurate information as possible for them. So share. If you're not a supporter, as much as I wish I could do this all just for free, we do have to survive long enough to do it, and the donations, the support helps us do that. Thank you all thank you to all of our supporters who are already with us as supporters. It's very simple, flhef.org/support. You can find all of the details there for how to get involved and how to support everything from monthly to one-time donations. It's simple, and share that out. And then finally, the Tell Your Story Project. If you haven't thought about it, or if your kids are looking for stuff to do, please, let them take a shot at it. Hand them your cell phone and see what kind of little video they can come up with and make, or for yourself if you want to speak, and tell just what home education is for you, what impact that's had that you've seen, and why you do it. Less than 60 seconds, and shoot that over to us. There's a spot on our website that is there for that. You can upload those, and we can make use of them. But thank you for your time and your attention. We'll go ahead one last time as we're finishing out and say thank you to our top sponsors, our title sponsor, Arete, and our other top sponsors, FPEA and Fisher Precious Metals. We thank you guys for being with us. We thank you for all of our families. We love that you put your heart and souls into your work and all the sacrifices that you make for your children. We love your vision that you have for what they'll become, and we hope that it all works out. And until then, we're going to give you your Monday back and let you get on with your regularly scheduled program of life. As soon as I find my music.